So we have the 1 trillion addressable market 2035, but digging down into the notes, actually, autonomous driving is a really big part of this for you.
That's right. Our latest research shows that physical AI could really become a $1 trillion market by 2035. That's 10 times higher than where the market is currently valued at. And that $1 trillion estimate spans 4 key robotics categories: autonomous vehicles, humanoid robots, advanced automation, and drones. And look, while I have really strong conviction that the late 2020s and early 2030s will be the decade of the robot, I also think that growth and adoption will likely come in stages rather than all at once. I can see how autonomous vehicles could lead the trend and set the stage. And in fact, nearly half of that estimate of the market growth comes from autonomous vehicles, or in dollar terms, that's about $500 billion by 2045. I think also intuitively this makes a lot of sense because autonomous vehicles clearly have a head start. The technology has been around for nearly a decade now. The production process is there. It can leverage an existing automotive supply chain. And I think more importantly, the AI models needed for autonomous vehicles can work with a much bigger real-world driving data set that's collected from millions of vehicles out there. And that's a very different story if you compare it to where humanoid robots are at the moment.
So if you follow the arc of what happened with autonomous driving, what needs to happen for humanoid robots for them to make a meaningful contribution to your $1 trillion forecast for addressable market by 2035?
I think the number one challenge that humanoids face right now is the lack of physical AI data. And that's because when you think about humanoid robots, they really bridge the gap between the cognitive, the digital, and the physical world. And in the physical world, the laws of mechanics and physics apply. A humanoid robot needs precise instructions if it's going to function and perform properly in an unstructured world that is made for humans. Take a simple example such as lifting a box. This is a very simple task for us humans. We have inbuilt dexterity, we have inbuilt intelligence, we know exactly what we have to do. But a humanoid robot needs precise instructions. It needs to know exactly how much force to apply, where to apply that force. And that simple example can get really tricky if something changes. If, for example, the box is actually heavier than expected, if the surface is slippery, that means that the robot needs a new set of instructions. And the challenge is that there is no dictionary out there. There is no single database that can tell us, look, for a 50-pound box, you need this amount of energy, this amount of force. All that needs to be built from scratch in order for the technology to scale and to become more useful in the real world.
In both cases, autonomous driving and humanoid robotics, and actually you could extend that to autonomous drone technology as well, there is a great emphasis on China, how far ahead it is in commercializing the technology, but also supply chain dependency. A lot of that supply chain has historically originated from China. How does that show up in your research?
So it's clear that China leads. I think it deploys robots on a completely different scale. For example, in 2025, we estimate that nearly 15,000 humanoid robots were deployed worldwide. 85% of those were installed in China. You get a similar story if you look at other types of robotics technologies like industrial automation. There, we're talking about 50 to 60% of the units are installed in China. If you compare these figures to what's happening in the US, the numbers look very different. Low teens for humanoid robots and even single digits for industrial robots. So the scale is very different. So China has the advantage in terms of technology, also access to raw materials. Take, for example, critical minerals, rare earths. You need a lot of those components to build some of these very, very specific physical components that go into a robot. So there are different chunks of the supply chain where China can really kick in. So all that comes together. But having said that, it's still early stages. I think we are just scratching the surface in terms of what physical AI can do. And I see lots of potential for that adoption to accelerate in other parts of the world, starting with the US and even potentially in Europe in a couple of years' time.